Then we will begin. Give them a moment to take their last picture or two. Have the cameras and the media leave. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the a special joint committee meeting between the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development and the Standing Committee on National Defense, Wednesday, June 6, 2007.
We're televised today, ladies and gentlemen. We're holding a briefing session on the handling of persons detained by the Canadian forces in Afghanistan.
Over the course of approximately 60 meetings, including today's meeting, the Foreign Affairs and International Development Committee has had the benefit of no less than 15 appearances by Cabinet Ministers in the 39th Parliament.
Similarly, the Standing Committee on National Defence has held 58 meetings. We've had 8 appearances by Cabinet Ministers, and we thank our Cabinet colleagues for being so generous with their time and responding to our requests. The requests we have made over the period of time in Cabinet. We appreciate Cabinet members again, and we appreciate them being here today.
Those ministers with us here today are the Honourable Peter MacKay, Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Stockwell Day, Minister of Public Safety, the Honourable Gordon O'Connor, Minister of National Defence, the Honourable José Werner, Minister of International Cooperation, and the Honourable Elena Jorgis, Secretary of State, Foreign Affairs and International Trade.
As usual, committee members, we will hear the statements and we'll commence a previously agreed to agenda for questions. We have asked the ministers to keep collectively the time used for opening statements to 20 to 25 minutes. We will be very closely guarding the clock as we go through the rounds of questioning to make sure that we have as much opportunity for questions as possible. And I remind all members here at the committee and ministers as well to address both the questions and answers through the chair. I'm not sure what the order of proceeding is for who's going to start, but ladies and gentlemen, you have 20 to 25 minutes. Please start.
Well, thank you both, Chairman Sorensen, Chairman Kasson, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be before the committee again, and pleased, of course, to be here with my Cabinet colleagues to discuss this important matter with you. And thank you for the opportunity to clarify on some very important matters, particularly with respect to detainees. As you know, Canada's assistance to Afghanistan accords with our highest international objectives to promote global security, freedom and democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and of course to reduce the terrible effects of poverty on a population that has been devastated by generations of war. Apporter à la demande de l'Afghanistan notre soutien à la population.
Delivered at Afghanistan's invitation, our support for the people of that country is part of a large international effort. It reflects a wide consensus between Afghanistan's democratically elected government and the UN and other world organizations. Dozens of donor nations, as well as 37 participants in the UN-mandated NATO-led International Security Assistance Force.
In Afghanistan, Chairman, is multifaceted, bringing security to a war-torn country, reinforcing the legitimacy of the state, reintegrating it into the international community, and fostering social and economic reconstruction. CEDA has been providing assistance even before 2001. D&D is helping liberate the country from the scourge of the Taliban, and my department, that of Foreign Affairs, is reestablishing diplomatic relations with Afghanistan since January of 2002. Correction Service Canada was engaged in mentoring and advising Afghan prison officials as early as 2002. And RCMP officers, of course, have been deployed since 2005, and my colleagues will speak more specifically to those portfolios. But our objectives, collectively, will only be reached by providing the tools to the Afghan government itself, the tools that it needs to serve its people. Pour devenir un pays sûr, libre, pacifique et viable.
to become a safe, long-term, free and viable country, Afghanistan needs to develop effective and professional police, courts and prison systems.
Or enhanced arrangement on the transfer of detainees with the government of Afghanistan. This arrangement complements the original arrangement that was signed by the previous Liberal government in 2005. One of the key elements of this supplementary arrangement is that it spells out in detail the full, unrestricted and private access that our officials and members of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission will receive to all detainees transferred by Canadian forces to Afghan authorities. This arrangement gives us the opportunity to help Afghans live up to their existing human rights and other obligations under international law, and encourage the application of the rule of law at all stages of the detention process. In the last few weeks, our provincial reconstruction team, the PRT, hosted an important human rights workshop attended by representatives of the Army, Police, Corrections officials, the Attorney General's Office, and the National Security Directorate of Afghanistan. Canada is this was the second of two planned workshops, Mr. Chair. Canada is providing equipment and uniforms in Kandahar and financial support nationwide to ensure that the Afghan National Police salaries are paid securely and on time. And I must say, one of the more touching experiences I had in visiting Afghanistan was to see the training and Canadian officials turning over these uniforms, which were made locally but paid for by the Government of Canada, to the Afghan police. And the pride that they felt in those uniforms, which sported the Afghan flag, was nothing short of amazing. It was very reminiscent, I'm sure, of the feeling that our own RCMP have upon graduation from depot. Mr. Chair, enormous diplomatic resources have already been dedicated to Afghanistan.
For example, our new ambassador in Kabul is the most senior Canadian official in Afghanistan, and he is ensuring that our engagement remains focused on the core overriding objectives that motivate and validate Canada's presence. In the South, we are installing a new senior civilian coordinator to lead our work in Kandahar and throughout the region.
Level officials in Kabul and Kandahar, devoted specifically to diplomacy, development, and security sector reform. And we're not alone, of course. Canada works actively through the United Nations, where we are a member of a core group responsible for the annual reauthorization of UNAMA, UNAMA, the body that leads all UN political development and human rights activities in Afghanistan. Nous travaillons aussi au sein de G8.
We are also working within the G8. I chaired the session on Afghanistan at the G8 Foreign Ministers meeting just last week in Potsdam, Germany.
European Union Summit in Berlin, the Prime Minister announced our participation in a pair of joint police training projects. Diplomacy holds everything together. It's what led to the Afghanistan Compact, which was signed in London, of which Canada and allies are key signatories. This and other agreements that structure international engagement in Afghanistan. Leveraging our resources across government departments and collaborating with international partners to deliver coherent programming that builds security, prosperity and stability in support of a national government that has the confidence of its people. And I would suggest that this is one of the very intangible but very real things that we see happening in Afghanistan, the confidence of their own government and own people to have a hand in their affairs. And this is the message that I want to bring to you, my colleagues, today. It's a message that we must continue to support the people of Afghanistan and their government as they continue to build and reconstruct their own country. I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Minister O'Connor.
Chairs, members of the committees, before I begin, I'd like to remind you why Canada is in Afghanistan. Premièrement, le Canada assure un présent.
First and foremost, Canada is in Afghanistan at the request of its democratically elected sovereign government. Secondly, Canada is in Afghanistan to work alongside 36 other nations under NATO command and with a United Nations mandate. And thirdly, and most importantly, we are there to provide for the security of Canadians.
That served as a haven for terrorists whose reach extended around the globe. In this mission, Canada is doing its utmost to prevent Afghanistan from becoming that failed state once again. As you know, we are pursuing this mission not only with aid dollars and civilian governance assistance, but with effective military force as well. Approximately 2,500 Canadian Forces personnel support the ISAF mission. They are helping to provide the secure and stable environment that is needed for the legitimate authority of the Afghan government to take root and for reconstruction and development to move forward. In the course of providing that security, the Canadian Forces may capture detainees. This afternoon, I would like to highlight how the Canadian Forces fulfill...
Mr. Minister, we have a point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Bouchard.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, I don't understand what's happening in the room here today. We were called here today for a special session on the detainees in Afghanistan, and now I think the ministers are going to explain to us what the RCMP is doing there, what CEDA is doing there, what Foreign Affairs is doing there, and I think that we're changing the whole intention of this meeting. The intent was to call the Minister of Defense, and now we're going from the Minister of Defense to different departments. We've reduced the 3 hours to 2, and I think there's a kind of muddying of the waters going on here. Why was this sent to us? We were here to talk about the detainees, and now we're talking about the Canadian Forces in Afghanistan in general. So are we going to try and shelter the Minister of Defense?
Well, anyway, I don't hesitate. I don't think it's really a point of order. I think what we've done is we've brought these 5 ministers here. We're going to have the opportunity to question them. Just as we do not determine which questions you may ask, it has been traditional in this House that we have afforded the ministers, when they come, the opportunity to say what they want in regards to the Afghanistan, their part of the file of Afghanistan, and we'll listen to those ministers, and we'll give you certainly an opportunity to ask whichever question you may choose. Now, this time will not come out of the minister's time, and we would ask the Minister O'Connor to continue.
In the course of providing that security, the Canadian Forces may capture detainees. This afternoon, I'd like to highlight how the Canadian Forces fulfill their roles and responsibilities regarding our detainee process in Afghanistan. The procedures our military members must follow in detainee situations are clearly outlined in their theatre standing orders. These orders emphasize that the Canadian Forces must treat all persons humanely in accordance with the standards set out by the Third Geneva Convention. As a general rule, detainees captured by the Canadian Forces are to be brought back to our temporary transfer facility in Kandahar to be processed and questioned. And if a detainee is found to be injured or wounded, that individual will receive the same medical treatment with the same urgency as a Canadian casualty. En fait, tous les détenus doivent subir un examen.
In fact, all detainees must be medically examined when admitted to Canada's temporary transfer facility, and then again when they are transferred or released. This allows us to confirm that no physical mistreatment of detainees occurs while they are in Canadian hands.
Forces are authorized to detain and temporarily hold persons in Afghanistan. Canada maintains a policy of ultimately releasing detainees or transferring them to the Afghan authorities in accordance with Canada's overall policy objectives in Afghanistan. The Canadian Forces will transfer detainees to the Afghan National Directorate of Security, and all transfers must be authorized by the Commander of Canada's Joint Task Force in Afghanistan. Every time a detainee is transferred, the authorities at the NDS are provided with a copy of our detainee arrangements. This set of arrangements makes clear Canada's expectations and Afghanistan responsibilities concerning the proper treatment of detainees once they are in Afghan custody. And a second copy of the arrangements is given to the detainee being transferred so that the detainee is fully aware of his or her rights. If, on the other hand, the detainee is found not to be a threat and is released by the Canadian Forces, our military personnel give that person back all his or her possessions and try to help them get on their way. Regardless of whether a detainee is transferred or released, a report of the detention is kept on file by the Canadian Forces. Throughout all of this, representatives from Foreign Affairs informed the right Canadian, Afghan, and international authorities, including the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, of what's going on at the required times. So in conclusion, the military's responsibility for detainees begins when suspected insurgents are captured. They are then brought to our holding facility where they receive medical assessment and appropriate medical care if they need it. They are then processed for handover to Afghan authorities or released back into the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister O'Connor. Minister Day, just a polite reminder, there's 12 minutes left in the 25 minutes.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président, et merci bien.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you as well to my colleagues, particularly for the interest that you have shown on this very important issue for us here in Canada and as well in Afghanistan.
Portfolio relate to the RCMP and to corrections. We have presently there are 9 police officers serving in Afghanistan, varying between Kabul and Kandahar. 8 of those are RCMP, 1 is a municipal force. That number is projected to move up to 22 following the Prime Minister's commitment, and that will be done in the very near future. There are 2 individuals who work for Corrections Canada who have, I might say, valiantly volunteered to work in Afghanistan to assist in capacity building in the prisons themselves. And I might add the magnitude of the task is really something for us to consider, and also the accomplishment to date. When you look historically at Afghanistan and recognize that over the last number of decades, or really the last number of centuries, this is a country that has been ruled variously, at the very best, by a feudal type of system, but more commonly by warlords or invading armies. And the fact that it has existed historically on the system of revenge, brutal revenge, upon one's enemies. And now here we have a situation where detainees, that's the legal technical word, but these detainees are not simply people who have jaywalked and then been apprehended. These are people who are suspected terrorists, people who have largely been apprehended in combative situations, people who know no limits when it comes to the suicide killing of others. And in a very short period of time, we've seen the people in Afghanistan, the actual regime there, and those operating in the prisons, go from a revenge type of system, which has been very brutal historically, to actually having a human rights commission, to respecting our demand that even their enemies have human rights and need to be treated well when they are in detention. And there's been significant progress on that. The reason I share that with you as I conclude my remarks well under the 12 minutes is because, intentionally or not, and I'm not being accusatory here, but the line of questioning that has been pursued over the last few months gives there's been a certain tenor to it, which gives an implication that our troops have been less than honorable in the apprehension, the questioning, and the oversight of the so-called detainees, the suspected terrorists. And I would hope, and I'm not saying it's been intentional, but that has been the air of the questioning. So much so that our troops tell us that they think they're being accused of doing wrong things when it has been noted the lengths that they go to show their humanitarian approach to these suspected terrorists. And I would hope in the questioning that comes out today, and I appreciate this time of questioning, it's valid, but I hope that that is the sentiment that's expressed, that we are concerned about the treatment of suspected terrorists, but we are not approaching this in accusatory tone towards our brave men and women in uniform. And I think that's well under the 12 minutes.
Thank you, Minister Day. Just before we introduce the next minister, could I just remind each one here today to shut off their cell phones. You can imagine with this number of people here, it's televised that these mics pick up not only to committee members but even to those in the audience. If you would mind shutting off your cell phones. Minister Werner, Minister of International Development.
Messieurs les présidents, chers collègues.
Chairman and colleagues, it's a pleasure to appear before you today to speak to the crucial role that we're playing in development in Afghanistan. Canada is one of the fundamental donors in Afghanistan. Canada allocated $139 million for reconstruction efforts in 2006-2007. We support development programs in Afghanistan that directly meet people's needs. As noted by my colleague, Mr. Colleague, we also aim to build Afghanistan's institutional capacities. I've visited Afghanistan twice, 6 months apart. I met with representatives of the Afghanistan government who are deeply committed to rebuilding their country, including the Minister of Rural Recovery and Development, Mr. Zia, and Mr. Atmar, the Minister of Education. We talked about the issues involved in reconstruction and the progress achieved. I can tell you that we are achieving results. I was able to see this for myself in the field. In April 2007, for example, I visited a project in Sola-Calais, a village 25 kilometers from Kandahar. I sat down with members of the Community Development Council to talk about the irrigation project they are executing through the National Solidarity Program, which is largely funded by Canada. This program is the micro-funding project, and it has yielded extraordinary results. As at March 31st last year, the FAAE had provided savings and loan services to over 335,000 people, including more than 230,000 women. As of April 30th, 2007, the NSP numbered 16,700 community development councils throughout Afghanistan, 27,000 approved projects, and 11,400 completed projects. As you know, the greatest difficulties are experienced in Kandahar in southern Afghanistan because of the precarious security situation. For this reason, Canada has multiplied its reconstruction assistance to Kandahar by almost 8 times since 2005-06. We have increased to $39 million that assistance in 2006-2007. Of this amount, we have invested over $20 million to meet people's basic needs. Another of our priorities to guide Afghanistan's fledgling democracy to maturity. For democracy to be stronger, people must have confidence in it. For this to happen, a democracy must be able to meet its citizens' basic needs. People are fully entitled to that human right. As you can see, Mr. Sorensen and Mr. Kassan, all of our areas of intervention are closely interrelated. We must balance all these dimensions so that the democratically elected government can become stronger and people can have faith in it. A delicate balance exists in Afghanistan, and we must be perseverant. Among our efforts, we support initiatives to strengthen human rights, especially the rights of the most vulnerable, such as women and girls. Mr. Chairman, I would like to remind you here of the tragic events of this week in which 2 women journalists from Afghanistan were killed. These tragic events strengthen our determination to promote a culture of human rights in Afghanistan, especially the rights of women and girls. On my first visit to Afghanistan, I met with Ms. Ganzanfar, the Minister of Women's Affairs. She, too, is bravely doing her job. Let me remind you that in September 2006, the person responsible for women's affairs in Kandahar province was killed in front of her home after criticizing how the Taliban treated women. This must change. Canada is working with its partners, including about 60 NGOs in Afghanistan that advocate women's rights. Rights and Democracy, a Canadian organization, is working with decision makers in the government of Afghanistan, Parliament and civil society to promote and protect women's rights, especially by proposing family law reforms. We will also continue to strengthen the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. We want to provide for more support for the Commission's activities. It promotes human rights. It investigates human rights violations. It monitors and supervises the treatment of prisoners and inmates. The Commission is a brand new institution that is establishing its influence on society. We are helping it to do so. Mr. Chairman, we still have many challenges to meet in Afghanistan, but we are on the right track. Our approach yields concrete results every day. I would like to remind you of a quote from Professor Barnett Rubin, Director of the Center on International Cooperation at the University of New York and a world-renowned specialist on Afghanistan. In March 2007, he said that Canada was one of the best donors in terms of the way that it gives assistance. Thank you for your attention.
Left in the time allotted for opening statements, Ms. Georges, do you have a few comments to make?
Yes, I do. I'll keep them brief. Thanks very much, colleagues, for an opportunity to talk to you about some of the progress that I witnessed firsthand. In Afghanistan, as we know, Canada is part of an evolving mission, and as they say, Rome was not built in a day. After 30 years of conflict, tyranny, and oppression, societal structures that we enjoy here in Canada are still in the very early stages of development. That said, the strides made in Afghanistan since the fall of the Taliban have been immense. Things that we take for granted in Canada, like a school system, our healthcare system, or even a banking system, are things that were virtually non-existent under the Taliban. One of the most striking meetings I had that clearly demonstrated to me the evolution of institution building was at the headquarters of our microfinance facility. I met with Afghanistan's Minister of Women's Affairs, who arranged for me to meet with a number of women who are beneficiaries of our microfinance programs. And as you know, Canada is the lead donor of this amazingly successful program. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans have been granted small loans to start small businesses or make other investments in their future. They take great pride in owning their own business and having some small control over their own future. Canada's microfinance programs are building a lasting legacy of entrepreneurship that sows the seed of individual independence. In another meeting I had with teachers and children was at the Ashiana School. I saw the school was teaching children the trades, fine art, history, and Afghan culture. More importantly, girls were going to school, and I presented a girls' gym class with a personal gift of soccer balls. Canada not only supports education and training, but also meals and medical attention, which is literally turning their lives around. The presence of Canada and our international allies is giving these children and their families a future they otherwise would not have had. Mr. Chair, beyond the hundreds of millions of dollars that Canada is spending on reconstruction, development, and poverty reduction in Afghanistan, perhaps the most important thing is that what we are doing is making sure that the solutions created will withstand the test of time. Institution building is central to this because these improvements have to be guided by and owned by the Afghan people, both nationally and locally, and they are. We must never forget we are in Afghanistan at the request of the Afghan government, and we must remember that it is not our place to command the pace or the way of Afghan development. For example, under the National Solidarity Program, local village councils spend development funds and oversee the projects in their communities. This way of operating is important because it respects Afghan choices and underlines the fact that the international community is there to help Afghans help themselves and not to impose someone else's plans. Let me say in closing that what I experienced there, what I saw, gave me greater hope for the future, and I look forward to sharing some of the incredible stories that some incredibly brave women shared with me.
Well, thank you very much. That exactly, thank you all. That's exactly on time, and we've left the maximum amount of time we can for questions. And Mr. Sorensen,
we'll go into the first round. The first round goes to the official opposition, Mr. Desange, and Mr. Coderre will do a split on time. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Now, with all of the actions or omissions of the government in the last few months, it is only natural that one begins to suspect what the government is doing. If you look at the Afghanistan 2006 report, which claimed to not have existed, Then it was released, heavily edited. You have Access to Information Committee having difficulty studying that particular report and that issue. Then invoking national security for simple information, such as when a bureaucrat read a report. And then first announcing a new detainee transfer deal in a federal court to shut down a lawsuit rather than briefing the House of Commons on it before. And in view of all of that, I have a couple of questions. And the first question is the Department of Defense has indicated to Foreign Affairs Committee in response to a request for a minimal amount of information concerning detainees that have been held by Canadian forces and may have been transferred in Afghanistan, that the information would not be provided on grounds of operational security. And the question is this: can you clearly articulate how providing this information would in any way jeopardize our operational security? And I'd like some concrete examples from Minister O'Connor.
Assange, Minister O'Connor.
Mr. Chair, to confirm, for operational reasons, we do not provide information on how many persons have been detained, transferred by the Canadian Forces, or any other details. The public release of information on the number of detainees held, transferred, released by the Canadian Forces and related details would be detrimental to our military operations because, for instance, the enemy could exploit the information for propaganda purposes and towards other operational objectives. And the enemy could use the information for planning, surveillance, and other operational purposes. And I must point out that operational security is a military decision, not a political one. This is a military decision. We are conducting military operations at this time, and the military have declared this to be operational security.
Well, Minister O'Connor, I don't buy that. This is an important issue for the country. You have Pentagon, of all people, that have lists of people that they're holding in Guantanamo Bay. Here's the list. You can get it off their website. Obviously, the United States of America does not believe that releasing the names of the detainees or the number of detainees is a matter of operational security for their forces who are also in Afghanistan. Why is it that we alone, as Canadians, as Government of Canada, believe that you have to be that secretive?
Mr. Assange. Minister O'Connor.
Yes, Chair, I guess the answer is Guantanamo Bay is in Cuba. There's no war going on there. And these are prisoners that the Americans transferred from Afghanistan and from wherever else. I don't know where they got all of them, but they've been transferred to Cuba. We are talking about detainees in Afghanistan in support of the Afghanistan government who are held either in our facility very temporarily or held in government facilities, so it's quite a different matter.
I should also respond to the preamble where Mr. Assange has repeated this fallacy a number of times. The request that was made for a report from the Department of Foreign Affairs was not a specific request for Afghanistan. It was a world report. Thereby, it was not available because a world report on detention does not exist. When specifics were requested and provided, then, in fact, the Department of Foreign Affairs did turn over the report, as they have previously. These reports, the honourable member would know as a member of the previous government, go back to the year 2002. They are handled, treated, disclosed, and redacted in exactly the same fashion as they have been since 2002 by members of the department, not at the political level. You've had testimony before the Ethics Commission that indicates that is in fact the case, and there was never any political interference or hands-on approach taken with respect to redaction.
Thank you, Minister McKay. To the opposition again, Mr. Coder.
Mr. Chairman, we are taking part in an operation today. I see all these people sitting there, but the thing is that 3 people here are dealing with the Afghanistan missions. No one is doubting the contribution of our brave men and women. But what is in question here is the management of this government, of this crisis, which they created really themselves. And that is why we are asking ourselves questions. So we're here at the request of the National Defense Committee in particular because there were problems. I remind you that there is an inquiry that the Department of Defense has already undertaken concerning 3 detainees. There were allegations of brutality. What I would like to know, and I will go right to the point, you talked about transfers earlier on. When we're talking about operations that are organized by the Afghan National Army and that we are with them, there's a difference between the transfer and a handover. For example, if there is an arrest carried out on the spot.
Depends concept means that the person can just hand over already that person to the Afghan National Army. How can we be sure that the agreement will apply there, if so, and how can we be respectful of the Geneva Convention when we know that in the Globe and Mail there was an article where at least we know that there was 2 individuals that disappeared at that time? How can we be protective and how can we protect our troops if we cannot even apply those kind of agreement on those issues?
Mr. Chair, as the member just referred to the Geneva Convention, we of course maintain a high standard. We have our troops following the Geneva Convention. And just to explain the process, in a combined operation involving Canadian forces, and there could be a number of choices, but let's pick the Afghan National Forces. The Canadian forces will not transfer any detainees taken by Canadian units, including those taken by the omelette, that's the advisors. And they won't transfer any to Afghan forces or any other forces. And during combined operations, the Afghan forces will retain responsibility for their detainees taken by their personnel, and we retain responsibility for our detainees. We process our own people.
Monsieur le ministre, est-ce que ça veut dire que dans ce genre d'opération-là,
Well, Mr. Minister, does that mean in that kind of an operation that there will not be any more people who will be given over to the Afghan authorities in the future? Because if we transfer them to the Afghan authorities, they're no longer under our responsibility. So that's why I'm making a distinction between a transfer of these detainees, where there is a process under this arrangement, or when you have quite simply arrested someone.
and those agreements won't apply.
I'm reading from the standing rules there, which are followed by our Canadian forces. There is no reference to any handover. If we take somebody and arrest them, they are processed by us. If other forces who are with us at the time take people, they then process them. But for example, there's an example today in Afghanistan, in our battle group, there's a Portuguese company with us in our battle group. If they were to take detainees, and I'm not aware if they have or not, but if they were, in that case, they would process through us because they do not have an ability to handle detainees. So we would handle them through the Canadian system, and then we would hand them on with proper due process onto the Afghan.
Monsieur le ministre, parce que ce que vous nous dites, on vient.
Well, what you're telling us, we have more or less confirmed, because there's a double process here. You have operations under which transfers can happen, and you have operations under which you say it's quite acceptable that you manage the situation as you wish. So during an operation, you clearly have handed over a future detainee directly over to the Afghan forces. And so it's not the same as the transfer. So that's why I make the distinction between the two. So how can you assure us that if there's a handover, first of all, that there won't be any register? If there's no register, there's no administrative record. And if there's no record, we can't do any surveillance and monitoring, and we cannot carry out any visits. So how can we ensure that regardless of the situation, in a combined operation...
Mr. Coderre, very quickly, Mr.
Okay,
Minister.
there isn't two processes, there's one process. And when Canadians capture an individual, they record all their details, and the normal process is they go back to Kandahar to our holding facility where they are medically inspected, etc., and then handed on to the proper Afghan authorities. We don't hand them over to the Afghan army. We hand them over to the proper security forces.
Mr. Coderre, thank you, Mr. Minister. Over to the Bloc Québécois now for 10 minutes.
Merci. Thank you. I will be sharing my time with Mr. Bachand. Welcome. First of all, I would like to say that what I find really troubling, that we don't seem to have any concerns for all of the people who have already been transferred, whether it is to the NDS forces, the National Directorate of Security, or the Afghan police, who have a reputation of not being very gentle with their detainees if they don't torture them. So there seems to be no concern at all about these people who have been completely forgotten. Now, I congratulate the journalists for the work that they have done that assists us in really seeing what is happening and then what the interests of Canadians and Quebecers would be in all of this. So this absence of concern, there's Mr. Ataran, a university professor, that expresses it in this way. Canada knows very well that there are very serious problems with the detainees and that they are exposing themselves to accusations of war crimes. That is why they do not want to know. So that will be my first question. I have another one. This absence of concern, this lack of concern, despite the inquiries, despite the report of the embassy staff, which was confirmed once again by the journalistic work and our questions, this famous report that was rejected at first and then redacted came, at least part of it, it was sent to a journal or a newspaper in its original form, and there was a motion that was passed so that these diplomats would come and appear before the committee, or these embassy staffers rather. So we yesterday heard what their three names are and the confirmation that we will be able to hear from them next week through a video conference. So my question is the following. Are you going to allow them to testify? I'll hold myself at that.
Okay, go ahead, and then we'll get the response from the ministers.
First of all, I'd like to come back to the possibility of joint operations. I don't think it's working. We had the agreement looked at by specialists, and they're saying that there's a legal void in all of this. When I say a legal void for combined operations, I'm saying that when the Canadian Army goes into the theater of operations and arrests the Taliban, the arrangement covers that. But if we go into a combined operation with the Afghan Army, that's where it's unclear. That means that a Canadian officer could grab a Taliban and hand him over to the Afghan colleague beside him, and then that person disappears. So that legal void will have to be dealt with, because if not, we make the Canadian government vulnerable and we make the soldiers vulnerable to potential war crimes accusations between the before the international court. So I think that that has to be dealt with. That shortcoming has to be dealt with. For combined operations, we must treat all of the detainees in exactly the same way, because if it's only happening on the Afghan side, obviously that's something we cannot control. When there's a combined operation, there's a great danger that these soldiers will be prosecuted later on. And it's the soldiers and the Canadian government that can be accused in such an event. And the second question, I'll give you the time to answer it in a moment. Have you envisioned the possibility of building jail structures that are Afghan? Because these events are happening there that would be combined NATO-Afghan facilities. If we had a prison that was co-managed by NATO forces and by the Afghanis, I think that would completely eliminate the possibility of any torture cases, because then we would have a common administration. We'd see what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And what I want to know, that's my second question, whether or not Canada is going to ask NATO for the possibility that we build a co-managed prison in Afghanistan to ensure that there is no more torture in the prisons. And finally, on the famous state secret, you keep saying you can't reveal details of that, and I'm always teased about that, but I say that Canada should be even more severe with its security ratings than the United States. We have a list of the 559 prisoners, their citizenship, where they were born, and their dates of birth. So how is it possible that the Americans can have that and that we can't? So I think that that's just going too far. Usually I reproach or I criticize the Canadian government for going to bed with George Bush, but now you're going even further in prohibiting us from having access to these lists. And this is my last point, Mr. Chairman. I think this is really important for MPs to have the most amount of information possible, because we are the ones who are accountable in the eyes of the Canadian public, and I can't accept that we are being given answers like I can't tell you for something as simple as the list of the detainees, and I give you the rest of the time to answer.
4 minutes left for responses. Mr. O'Connor, are you going to start?
I'll perhaps respond. Peut-être premièrement je réponds à la question.
Well, I might answer Madame Allen's question first. I will answer in English so that it is as clear as possible.
And these allegations, Mr. Chair, I want to put it on the record that no one has been able to produce any evidence whatsoever that a Canadian soldier, diplomat, or aid worker or otherwise has ever been complicit or directly involved in anything remotely resembling war crimes. And I find that type of allegation and that type of torqued rhetorical characterization as completely offensive to not only soldiers but the entire mission that's going on in defense of the people of Afghanistan. So let's put that aside. With respect to the question Madame Lalonde posed on retroactivity of our efforts to protect detainees, and let's not forget, as Mr. Day quite rightly pointed out, that the detainees here in question are suspected Taliban terrorists. Having said that, they are, of course, like a prisoner in Canada, like the worst offenders in Canada, entitled to due process and entitled to be treated until such time as due process has been completed, to a presumption of innocence and protection in compliance with humanitarian law and international conventions. And, Mr. Chair, the efforts by Canadian officials now that this new enhanced agreement is in place does include an effort to cooperate with Afghan authorities to locate and to query Afghan officials as to the treatment and the well-being of detainees that were turned over to Afghan officials. But again, I underscore that the actual holding and detention of these individuals is in the Afghan authority. Now, we are there obviously trying to support them in every way in building capacity and also making sure that they're meeting international standards in the best possible fashion, and we'll continue to do that. That's what this enhanced agreement was very much aimed at doing. And with respect to her further questions about employees from the Department of Foreign Affairs, we've had testimony from Department of Foreign Affairs, and I want to refer to a comment from Ms. Jocelyn Sorbin, who appeared before a committee regarding allegations around a report and redaction. And I'm quoting from her testimony. With regards to being directly told by a minister's office to redact, I am not aware of such a practice. We, meaning her department, are arm's length, and that doesn't happen. She went on to say, the redactions are done with the program's area's involvement in my office. I'm the delegated authority. At the end of the day, I'm the one making the decision on disclosure, and the minister's office is not involved in these decisions of the review.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes, just quickly, two questions. First, it has to do with combined operations. As I said earlier, Canadians handle their detainee system. Other countries handle theirs, even in the combined operation. But when it comes to Afghan forces with us, normally we have an operational mentoring team with each company. And our standing orders are, if a member of our mentoring team picks up a detainee or captures an individual, they are processed through the Canadian system, not the Afghan system. So if a Canadian captures somebody, it goes through the Canadian system. Your second part about Guantanamo, again, you'll find that my numbers may be a little bit off, but there's about 20,000 Americans in Afghanistan in different forces. And they, I assume, are taking detainees. I have no idea how many they are or where they are, but they're not going to Guantanamo, or I don't think they're going to Guantanamo. So they're not reporting what's going on in Afghanistan because there's current operations going on there. And neither are any other countries that are in NATO. So we are following operational security.
Thank you, Minister O'Connor. We will now move to the New Democratic Party for 10 minutes. Ms. Black and Ms. McDonough.
And we will share our time.
Thank you.
Thanks. I want to respond to the concluding remarks that Minister Day made, because I was the first member of Parliament to raise the issue of detainee transfers in the House of Commons the very first day that Parliament sat last year. And I want to clearly put out that no one in my party or in my estimation in any opposition party made any kinds of aspersions or comments about Canadian Forces personnel in this issue. What we were questioning is your government's commitment to human rights, and we were questioning the inadequacy of the agreement that was signed on detainee transfers. Never once were we questioning the role of Canadian Forces. So I just want that on the record. During the whole discussion and the questions around, I'm responding to what you said, Minister. So in relation to how this whole issue has been handled, we've had instances where we've been informed by ministers in the House, misinformed by ministers in the House on the role of the International Committee of the Red Cross. We've been misinformed about the role of the Afghan Human Rights Commission and the resources that they have to do their job. Clearly, our questions at all times were on the role of the government and the government's handling of human rights. I want to ask Minister O'Connor, we've had a board of inquiry into detainees, and there's been a report from them saying that detainees that Canadians have taken have gone missing. They can't find them. I want to ask the Minister O'Connor, how many of the detainees that Canadians have taken in Afghanistan, do you know where they all are now? Can you tell us that what the status of the detainees taken by the Canadian Forces in Afghanistan?
Black, and just to remind you, let's continue to make sure both questions and answers are through the chair. And Madam McDonough, if you wanted to pose your question at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to say in your opening statements today, Ministers, you once again cited the security of women and children and protection of human rights as the principal focus of Canada's efforts in Afghanistan. And yet, during the recent visit to Afghanistan by the Prime Minister, he remained dead silent, dumb as an oyster, as we would say in Atlantic Canada, while the leading human rights campaigner for Afghan women and children, an outspoken advocate for bringing warlords to trial for human rights abuses, was arbitrarily suspended from the Afghan parliament. For what? For criticizing the ineffectiveness and corruption that is rampant in that body. Why was the Prime Minister and your entire government absolutely silent on Malala Joya's suspension? And if Canada, the Canadian government, doesn't support this proven champion of Afghan human rights, why would the people of Afghanistan believe that Canada's mission in their country will protect their human rights?
Thank you, Madam McDonough. A number of questions. I think the first one posed was to Minister Day, and then,
Mr.
O'Connor. Thank you, Chairman. I don't know that it was so much a question to me as commentary, and I appreciate the commentary. It's exactly the type of response that I've been trying to elicit for months from opposition members, not to, in their questioning, be casting a negative pall over the action of our soldiers. And in fact, we have heard today again from the Liberal member, Mr. Kader, that there's some kind of game going on, sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge with our soldiers and theirs. So that type of veiled accusation continues. We have no difficulty in any way, shape, or form being questioned about government actions. I'm talking about the actions of soldiers that have been noted by even Afghan forces and by those who've been apprehended by Canadians, that their reflection on the actions of our soldiers have been nothing but exemplary. And it has been unfortunate, and I said, I'm not saying it was intentional, but it has been unfortunate. Our soldiers feel an accusatory tone towards their actions. And there's nothing wrong with questioning government actions but our soldiers have been honorable in this whole process.
Minister O'Connor, and whoever else may want to answer.
Yes, to my knowledge, our forces have recorded every detainee they've taken since the beginning of the Afghan mission. And we also have medical records for them, etc. But the Canadian forces do not have any responsibility as such to monitor what happens to detainees in the Afghan system.
Perhaps I can pick up on that point, because that is exactly, Mr. Chair and colleagues, what this enhanced arrangement is very much aimed at achieving. And clearly this arrangement, having been placed in effect a few months ago, is still morphing into an effective system of monitoring. There were shortcomings in the previous arrangement that we know were highlighted by some of these complaints by detainees, and what we have now is a greater system of reporting. We have a higher, I would suggest, standard when it comes to the obligations placed upon the Afghans themselves. We have greater unfettered and private access made available to Canadian officials, diplomats, and personnel from Corrections Canada. That also extends to the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission and is also meant to enhance access from the International Commission of the Red Cross. So this enhanced arrangement, Mr. Chair, as it has been referred to by many, including noted journalists and others who have closely followed this issue, is now the standard. And in fact, other countries, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chair, are looking to this example as a way to improve their own monitoring.
Minister McKay, you still have some time, either Ms. McDonough or Ms. Black.
Yeah. Question is, where are the detainees now? Do we know where they are? And monitoring, Minister, is supposed to be part of what's taking place here.
And as I said, Mr. Chair, this is exactly what's happening. We now have a much greater ability to track the detainees, to ensure that the standards that are expected are being met. And the Afghans themselves, of course, clearly understand the expectations when it comes to detainees who were turned over by Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan, that is specifically the role that is expected of them, that they will not only ensure that we know about their whereabouts, but that their treatment will conform with international standards, the standards that we have clearly set out. Our ambassador in Afghanistan, Arif Lalani, now meets regularly with Afghan officials, including the head of the security, which he has met very recently, to continue to underscore our expectations.
And Mr. Speaker, if I could, we wouldn't want the record to show that 5 ministers remained once again dumb as an oyster in the face of Malala Joya's plight. So I wonder if I could please ask for a response around the status of Malala Joya, and whether it is still the government's position that they have no comment on this grotesque, undemocratic, arbitrary suspension for having criticized the corruption and the ineffectiveness of Parliament.
Some oysters have pearls, Mr. Chair. I'll allow my pearl to the left to respond to that question.
Madam Verner. Minister Verner.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all my colleagues here and to reiterate how the Canadian government is committed to women and children in Afghanistan. And it's perhaps a good idea to take this opportunity to remind everyone, because sometimes news travels fast in this world, and we don't remember what the Taliban regime really was and what it represented for women. It was certainly one of the most atrocious that the world has ever seen. Women were not allowed to work, nor to walk alone in the street without being accompanied by a very close male family member. They were denied access to public baths. They were denied access to education, and that was the same thing for young girls. And I think that it's a good idea to remember the arbitrary executions that took place in the stadiums in public before tens of thousands of men and young men for minor infractions.
Twice asked a very specific question about Malala Joya and the government's position, and I've heard nothing but filibustering with all kinds of vague references that this committee does not need to have a lecture on. I'm asking if there's any of these 5 ministers who cares enough or knows enough to speak about the status of Malala Joya, or have you never even raised it to this date with the Afghan government? And no, I won't stay home and stick to my knitting.
Unfortunately, and I didn't hear that comment, unfortunately the time has expired for that round of questioning. We are moving over now to the government side, to Mr. Obrey, to start off 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be sharing my time with my colleague Russ Hibbert. Not you. No. What's he doing on my side, anyways?
You got to keep
my turn. Don't waste my time. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I would like to thank all the ministers for coming out here today. It's their strong commitment to ensure that Canadians are aware of what is happening in Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, Canada's participation in Afghanistan involves our military, diplomats, CEDA employees, correctional officers and members of the RCMP, as all of you have indicated. However, there is still a perception out there in the public that progress is not being achieved yet. Can you outline how Canadian leadership, and you have given a brief outline, how Canadian leadership is being exercised in Afghanistan, most importantly, our successes and challenges? Thank you.
Good.
Well, I think on the development side, I'm going to allow my colleague from International Development Agency to speak to the specifics of your question about what tangible proof we've seen, the specific references to the Afghan Compact, which sets out benchmarks that are to be achieved in areas of development itself, reconstruction, and programming. On the diplomacy side, we know that we have a very high level of engagement in Kabul between our ambassador there, Arif Lalani, and his counterparts and officials inside the Afghanistan government. All of this, of course, happens very much under the umbrella of security. And all of this, of course, happens in capacity building that we are seeing with the police themselves, the Afghan National Army, including, of course, the prison officials. And we have now a much better grasp on the expectations that must be met and how we intend to do the necessary follow-up. And we, of course, are constantly monitoring this situation. We are following up, back to an earlier question with respect to the whereabouts of Afghan detainees. This takes time. And let's be very frank, this is a mission now that goes back a period of time. The Afghan authorities have given us assurances that they will give us the location of Canadian detainees to the best of their ability. But look, people in Afghanistan, many, do not have a street address. They don't have a birth certificate. There are many who bear the same name. These are conditions that actually exist, Mr. Chair. And this is the reality that we're dealing with in Afghanistan. It's not an easy task to track individuals, particularly those whose stated purpose is to avoid detection. These detainees have spent a great deal of their life living in incognito. They have made a life's work to avoid detention and avoid capture. So they're not exactly expected in many cases to be cooperative when providing information. And let's not forget what's in the Al-Qaeda handbook. You are to immediately make allegations of abuse and torture upon being captured by coalition forces.
Go ahead, sir.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Oui.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, indeed, progress has been made in Afghanistan, most particularly in Kandahar. Why? Because since security has been improved, we have been able to make progress. For example, last year in Kandahar, we spent $5 million. It's almost 8 times that amount this year that we were able to invest, and that has allowed 500 community development councils to carry out and complete some 500 projects. So the list is obviously available on our website. So these irrigation projects, training and education, health, clinics to vaccinate children, We have a new neonatal center that has been built at the hospital there that has reached out to over 1,000 women per year to give them a safer and cleaner facility in which to have their children. They've also been able to get vaccinated against measles. So yes, progress, significant progress has been made, and this increased security has allowed us, or has given us that opportunity. And the more that's the case, the more we are going to be able to provide concrete results to the population of Kandahar.
Mr. Hebert, the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions, one from Minister Werner and one from Minister Georges. For Minister Werner, the reconstruction and development of Afghanistan is a complex task, and critical to that task is capacity building. And now, capacity building, I'm talking about teaching Afghan authorities how to better manage their own affairs. That means teaching everything from how to manage prisons to how to properly deal with detainees, to developing a bureaucracy to build and maintain a sewer system, highways, basic infrastructure that's all so critical to the future of Afghanistan. And I'm wondering if you could expand for the committee on the concept of capacity building and the progress that's being made, and as well if you could explain for the committee what Canada's contribution has been to capacity building in Afghanistan. My second question to Ms. Georges. Now, Minister, there's some here in Canada, particularly the NDP, who are calling for a complete pullout of our forces from Afghanistan in one breath, and yet they claim to stand for, women's rights and children's rights in the next breath. You had an opportunity to meet with a leading women's rights advocate in Kandahar recently on your visit, and I'm wondering if you could, for the committee, expand a little bit on what Canada's presence means to the rights of women and children in Afghanistan, and perhaps you could dispel this myth that's being perpetuated by the NDP.
3 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my colleague for his question. Yes, indeed, Afghanistan, the reconstruction and development in Afghanistan is a great challenge. This is a country that has experienced decades of war and conflict, and this is a country that for the first time has a democratically elected government. So Canada, with other donor countries, intends to help the Afghan government to take matters in hand. We have many programs. For example, when the time came to draft the Afghan constitution, CEDA, in partnership with Rights and Democracy out of Montreal, supported the efforts that were being made. We worked with some 60 NGOs and Afghan affiliates in order to ensure that women's rights would be included in the Afghan constitution. In order to do so, there was a great deal of research that had to be done. We helped them to present their briefs and to ensure that they were properly prepared to make their presentations when it was time to draft that constitution. So this is a huge step forward for women in this country, where they had lost all of their rights. They had none left at all. So that is only one example, but it is an extremely important one. And by continuing to educate the population and to educate all Afghans, that we will be able to make huge progress in human rights for everyone.
Thanks very much. First, I agree with you. It is very hypocritical, in my opinion, for the NDP to sit here, particularly today, and launch some personal attacks at us with respect to us not giving her a comment at her demand with respect to Madam Joya. Of course, we are monitoring this situation very closely because it has some impact at some point on women's rights as to what's going on, but it is their parliament. And as I said early in my remarks, it is for the Afghan government and the Afghan people to make decisions about how their lives will go forward, and we're there to assist them in those decisions that they make. But I do want to specifically talk about Rona Taran, who I met in Kandahar City, and the stories that she had told me about what it was like under the Taliban before the international community was there, how her little girl could not go to school, how women could not own a business, how there were women whose bones would break during childbirth because they were not permitted to go outside to have the sunlight come upon them so they could get the vitamin D that they need. This was not something that they were able to have. You know, what she clearly said to me with tears in her eyes was how much she appreciates Canada's presence there, because now her little girl is able to go to school. And she gives clear credit to Canada and to Canadians, and she knows that the Taliban is working. They are actually, they're being successful in breaking the resolve of the opposition parties in Canada, and she clearly knows this. And her message to us, and the message that she asked me to take back here, was to tell Canadians, please do not leave, do not go, and do not turn your back on us now, because all will be lost. And we cannot fool ourselves. There would be mass murder.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now move into the second round. I would want to remind all committee members that the second round is now 5-minute round, so keep your questions and your answers concise, and we'll get as many in as possible. We'll move to the official opposition to Mr. Wilford and Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Martin and I will put our questions first, and then we'd like the answers from the ministers. I just want to say, first of all, Mr. Chairman, that there's no loyalty test in terms of our troops, and everyone in this room supports our troops, and any suggestion otherwise is totally unacceptable. We've heard from the Minister of Defence with regard to the use of the rationale of operational security. I'm not sure how this differs from World War II, and we saw on newsreels all the time, and also in Vietnam, each week the lists of the number of captured or killed. However, given that the Minister has used this continually, I'd like to ask the Minister through you, Mr. Chairman, in the case of Amnesty International and others that have been brought forth with respect to the detainee issue, and particularly the case that was brought forth by Colleen Swartz, who makes the determination in these cases that the government officials cannot provide essential evidence? Is this yet another case of ministers who don't want to take responsibility? And I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin.
Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And ministers, again, I echo my colleagues' comments. Nobody in this House does not support our troops. Everybody considers our troops working at the highest ethical standards under extremely difficult circumstances, and we are very, very proud and very, very thankful for all of what they're doing in Afghanistan and around the world. Now, when this issue came to light a few weeks ago, the Afghan government said that they were going to have a complete and full investigation. However, we have not heard anything about this investigation. So I'd like to know whether or not you can tell us when the final report of this investigation is going to be completed, and if you will allow the final investigative report to be given to this committee in an unedited fashion. And my second question is, has the monitoring of the Afghan prison systems that were allowed in the new agreement, has that started, and are Canadians involved in that? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Wilford's question was about some specific trial that I'm not familiar with. However, he brought up the issue of operational security. I can tell you we within the political process do not interfere in operational security, and I doubt when your government was in power whether you did or you did also. Either the police authorities or the security authorities or the military authorities declare issues operational security to protect their operations. In this case, it's Afghanistan, to protect our military operations, and we as politicians do not interfere in that process. But with respect to the actual trial, I don't know what trial you're talking about.
Mr. McKay.
Yeah, to respond to Mr. Martin's question about whether we have now begun a new and more detailed process as a result of the enhanced arrangement, the answer is yes. I'm aware, based on the most recent information, which was just this afternoon from the our Afghanistan ambassador, Arif Lalani, that there have in fact been 5 visits to detention facilities since the signing of the supplementary agreement, that officials during those visits have stressed the importance of a full and unrestricted private visit, which was to take place and did take place, and they made it clear that these provisions of visits were also to be extended to the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, as well as the International Commission for the Red Cross. Officials have also underscored the need during those visits to treat detainees humanely and to live up to the expectations with respect to international conventions and their own domestic law. And of course, Afghan authorities, based on that information, have given assurances that they will, which is of course also the spirit and intent of the enhanced agreement, which was signed on behalf of Afghanistan by their Defense Minister Wardak and our ambassador to Canada. So, Mr. Chair, that process now is well underway. It will evolve, of course, and we expect that we will have more information available to us based on that increased access. And as a result, I would suggest there will be greater oversight and greater input from Canada on the human rights situation inside those facilities where Canadian detainees or detainees turned over by Canadian military officials will be held.
Thank you, Minister McKay. We'll move to the government side, to Mr. Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ministers. Today is the 63rd anniversary of D-Day, an invasion in 1944, a historic day that was the start of liberating a people that had been held captive by an evil regime for a long time. As part of a great alliance then, Canada set an example for other nations on how to conduct an effective and ethical military operation while helping local populations get back on their feet. When I spent last Christmas outside the wire with the troops in Afghanistan, and we traveled in convoy through the villages, I saw the same thing. Canadian troops conducting an effective and ethical military operation to the demonstrated approval of the local population. The images of children giving us thumbs up as we passed and people getting on with what for them was a normal life are still clear. Minister Verner, can you comment on the example that Canada is setting for other countries today, 63 years after D-Day, on how to get a tough but necessary job done while respecting the people that were there to help, combatant and non-combatant alike?
Minister Verner.
Oui.
I think that really the best answers that really can be given to your question would really be the partners that we work with in Afghanistan. They're respected and recognized, and allow me to give you a few names because they are there and they've been there for a long time. Some of them have been there even longer than from our commitment to Afghanistan. There's Nigel Fisher, who said that thanks to the increased efforts and the deaths from red measles, and he's done so much work on that. There's Chris Alexander, who is with the United Nations, and he said if there's progress that's been made, it's because the country has been able to benefit from exceptional people in the field. People who have served in Afghanistan were not only exemplary representatives from their countries, but also the very best to have arrived to assist in Afghanistan. Professor Barnett Rubin said that Canada is one of the best donor countries because of the way that they help. Gordon Smith from the University of Victoria said that over the last year and a bit, I have been impressed by the way in which we have increased our aid to Afghanistan, particularly for what is happening in Kandahar. In summary, a whole series of people who are well known and recognized for the work that they are doing in Afghanistan, helping that country to get back on track. They all appreciate our efforts and our presence in Afghanistan, our military presence that is helping us to help people to rebuild.
Presentation by the Senless Council. It was full of, I suspect, deliberate misrepresentation about alleged mass starvation within an hour of Kandahar. Minister Verner, can you comment specifically on the level of food aid and agricultural aid development, like farm irrigation in Kandahar province, which I suspect bears no resemblance to the Senless report at all?
Minister Verner.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, my colleague, for giving me the opportunity to come back to that issue. We are in Afghanistan because we care about the population and want to help them. We want to meet their needs. And are there challenges that remain? Absolutely. That's why we have to stay there. That's why we'll be there and to help with development until at least 2011. One thing is clear, everyone wants to help. The representatives from my department met last week with representatives of the Stanless Council. The Senless Council. So this allows us to help with the reports of people who are dying of hunger. We asked them a number of very specific questions in order to find out where the camps were that these people were. Where are these people so that we can go and help them? We know that there are other organizations that are working on in the field there. We're asked the same questions because these organizations want to bring assistance and help to these people. So I have to tell you that we're still waiting for the answers. That's all I can tell you on that. But in the meantime, I can say that the World Food Program and the directors of that program have clearly stated that thanks to Canadian assistance, we've been able to bring 10 metric tons of food into people in need of it last year, and we expect to double that, to bring it at least up to 20 metric tons this year.
And then back to the government. 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please allow me to remind you that today's briefing was supposed to be on the treatment of detainees by Canadian forces in Afghanistan. That is really the issue, and we've heard about all kinds of other issues here. Which makes me think that we've really wasted our time here. So, however, in an effort to get a real answer to the questions that we're asking ourselves, I would ask Mr. O'Connor if indeed he knows what happened to the soldiers who were, or rather to the prisoners who were captured by Canadian soldiers. Yes or no, do you know what happened to them? Or where in fact, where are they currently?
That question. I don't consider it a waste of our time to be talking about women's rights in Afghanistan or the development and the assistance that has been provided to the people of Afghanistan by the Canadian government. I hardly consider that a waste of time.
The objective of today's meeting was clearly stated, as it says, on detainees held by Canadian forces, and we are trying to get answers in the House. We haven't gotten them. We asked for this special briefing with a primary goal of getting them those answers. So this is not the time to dilute the debate and ensure that we have no more answers today than we are able to get in the House and have had before.
As I said in my opening comments, the Department of Defense has certain responsibilities with respect to detainees. That is, from the initial capturing them, processing, etc., making sure they're medically fit, etc., and they're handed over to the proper authorities. The Department of Defense does not monitor what happens to detainees once they go in the Afghan system.
So then, how can you assure us that these people are not being tortured?
There is an agreement, an extended agreement that the Minister of Foreign Affairs has just spoken about, and I'm going to have him talk about the monitoring process, but Defense doesn't do monitoring. It captures and processes.
Well, Mr. Chair, the system that is in place under this enhanced arrangement has a clause aimed directly at the subject of notification and any change in the material status of the detainee, and it reads, the Government of Canada will be notified prior to the initiation of proceedings involving a person transferred from Canadian forces and prior to the release of the detainee. The Government of Canada will also be notified of any material change in the circumstances regarding the detainee, including the instance of alleged improper treatment. And I underscore the word alleged here, Mr. Chair, because just as the detainee themselves are entitled to due process from time of detention to determination, I would suggest as well that the Afghan authorities, of whom these allegations are aimed, are also entitled to the presumption of innocence. When it comes to any investigations that are ongoing, if there has been improper treatment towards a detainee and is proved and is borne out, then appropriate action would be taken by the Afghanistan government, and we would support them in that regard. The training that's taking place inside prisons, this improved access, including private access to examine detainees and to hear about these allegations, I would suggest is going to do a lot to raise the standard of professionalism inside their penal institutions.
I might add, Chairman, in response.
Go ahead, Mr. Day.
In response to the question, though for reasons quite appropriately articulated by our Minister of Defence in terms of Canada not producing lists for quite understandable security reasons, as with other nations, in the facilities in which our corrections officers have been granted access, there's 3 of those, the Afghan authorities themselves post the numbers. In the Kandahar facility, the large Kandahar facility, at the time of approximately the 17th visit of our of officials, there's been over 20 visits now, there were 838 people in that particular facility. That's on the Afghanis registry. In the National Defense, the Afghan NDS facility, also in Kandahar, there were 40, and in their police facility there were 35. So if large numbers were suddenly to go missing, that would be very evident. That registry is open for inspection, though it is not our job nor our responsibility to do the monitoring. And so if there was any radical change in those numbers, it would be evident, it would be reported, and would have to be accounted for.
Thank you. We'll move to the government side again to Mr. Khan and Mr. Goldring. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues, ministers, for being here. I'll be very short and quick, and since everybody's putting things on record, I'd like to do the same. Mr. Chairman, I want to point out for the record that it was the Liberal government that deployed the troops in Afghanistan without debate and without vote. It was the Liberal government that deployed troops in southern Afghanistan. It was the Liberal government that approved the inadequate detainee agreement. I congratulate the government for improving upon it. As far as the human rights issue is concerned,
point of order to Mr. Coder.
I just wondering if it's the report that we're supposed to have from him that he's making right now.
That's not a point of order. Continue, Mr. We won't take that. We will not take that.
Thank you, sir. As far as the human rights issue question brought up by the NDP is concerned, this government stands up for human rights. And the examples are many, such as Air India inquiry, Mararar apology, Chinese head tag, Japanese internment. And I'm also perplexed by the comparisons drawn by my colleagues on the Second World War and the current conflict. That was a war between states. It was not a war between a state or NATO versus transnationals and insurgents. It is not a state. Also, the example of Guantanamo Bay and Afghanistan also perplexes me. However, my question is to the Minister of Development. Very quickly, could you just confirm for me, Madam, that there are 335,000 Afghans benefiting from small loans, and 75% of them happen to be women. There are 10,000 families that are being fed in Kandahar, reaching 3.4 million through World Food Programme. 350,000 children in Kandahar, again, the dangerous area, have been vaccinated against polio, targeting 7 million. My question to the Minister of Defence as well, and you, Madam, is, after the Operation Medusa, what projects, if any, are taking place in Kandahar and their mines? And Minister of Defence, the question to you, sir, is the operation to secure Kajaki Dam a military operation, or is it for the purposes of provincial development?
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Mr. Goldring, if you have a quick question, and give the ministers time.
Madam Secretary of State, you had indicated that you visited Afghan just recently, and you gave some very compelling remarks on your interaction with Afghans. I'm wondering if perhaps you could comment on if you had been speaking to some of the military who were there too, and whether they shared your same sense of being and same sense that we are doing well for the people of Afghan. And if you have any other stories that with your interaction with the people of Afghan that were particularly poignant, and comment possibly on, to clarify their sense on the continuation of Canada's involvement And do they have a fear if Canada is not?
Thank you, Mr. Goldring. And Madam Werner, or perhaps first to Mr. Cons and then Madame Jurgis, or I'm sorry, Mr. O'Connor.
Just two quick things. One, just to make certain that there's no misunderstanding on numbers of prisoners. Those numbers don't have any relationship to Canadian detainees. They are criminals, etc., etc. So just so there's no misunderstanding, the press doesn't report there's huge numbers of detainees. The other one is respect to the Kajaki Dam. The intention of securing that area, and right now it's penetrated with a lot of Taliban, is to unleash its ability to generate electrical power. Electrical power is in great need in the south, so that industry and normal folk can live properly. They need power, and that's what's behind that. I'll hand over now to Ms. Werner.
Oui, merci, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues. Yes, indeed. The figures that you mentioned are the right ones. They're available, indeed, on our website. It's important for the Canadian people to be able to follow the overall results. This site is updated regularly. Since the Medusa operation, and when we look at the data that's been published, the operation has allowed, in terms of development, for us to increase the number of projects that have been completed to up to 250 in the Kandahar region. And the operation also allowed the population to elect 150 community development council members. In terms of the results in Kandahar, I can tell you, you gave some microcredit figures, and the most recent are that 335,000 Afghanis have taken advantage of those small loans. 3/4 of those are women. And NISFA, which is the organization that manages that fund, just opened offices in Kandahar. So this is very good news for the people of that province.
Government, or to the opposition side, and it will be Mr. Petrie and Mr. Iking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Mr. Minister O'Connor. There have been 2 detainees confirmed with the Corrections Canada representatives that visited the country that they were poorly treated. So have the Canadian authorities investigated on this issue? There's no way to find out. We are bounced back and forth between the departments of public security and defense. So Hambridiki said that the relevant information on this issue was provided to the Independent Human Rights Commission in Afghanistan and the International Red Cross. So what is the relevant information that was given, and why is that available abroad but not available to the Canadian population through this committee and through this Parliament? Why this silence? So, Mr. Minister, I would like to say that you are accountable before this committee, the Parliament, and the Canadian public. Would you commit to providing the results of that investigation regarding these 2 detainees and provide us with the relevant correspondence on this issue between the Department of Foreign Affairs, the International Red Cross, and the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission? Thank you.
Minister O'Connor.
Mr. Chair, in fact, it's not within my realm of responsibility. It's not within the Defense Department. I'm going to hand over to Minister Day and then Minister McKay, because it's not within the realm of the Defense Department.
Just to clarify for the member, and having worked with him for a number of years, I believe his question to be sincere, but I just need to correct his suggestion that there was confirmation of maltreatment. There have been now a total of, if my understanding is correct, as of today, 4 cases where, since February, where individual prisoners have alleged that they were maltreated. Our officials, who try as best they can to accurately report everything they see and hear, did not see visible signs of that. However, when an instance like that is reported, it is passed on to the appropriate Afghan authorities. It also should be noted that people who are classified as Taliban, people who are classified as Al-Qaeda, and there are links between the two, have been told and instructed, in fact, when questioned, to say they have been tortured, whether they have been or not. Now, that is not in any way to diminish the possibility that somebody may have been. I just share that with you so you can see the difficulty that officials have if they are approached by a prisoner who says they've been tortured. They don't see any actual signs of it. They also know that these people have been told, instructed, that if they're ever captured, to absolutely say and reiterate that they have been tortured. I'm just saying it makes it difficult for them, but they do report the allegations, and there have been 4 such reports to date that we're aware of.
Minister McKay, please.
Yeah, just to follow up on Mr. Day's comments, that is in fact the case, that these allegations which the member refers to, which occurred in April, Canadian officials immediately informed Afghan authorities about this in Kandahar, these allegations of abuse. They were passed on, and the information relevant to those particular cases were also provided to the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission, as they should be, and the International Committee on the Red Cross. The governor of Kandahar and the director of the National Security Directorate, who is at the facility in Kandahar, were also given the information that we had in our possession. And the information relevant to this particular case will be pursued by the Afghan authorities, and they will, of course, in time report this back to us as per the agreement. So these allegations of abuse we've taken very seriously. We've acted upon them inside the parameters of this new enhanced agreement, which is proof that it has, in fact, already begun in operation. And the names and locations of the detention center where this allegation originated was provided, and the 2 individuals in question made their complaints in the presence of NDS authorities. So there is no question that the Afghan authorities themselves are aware and are seized with acting and reporting on this particular allegation.
Thank you. That concludes that time span. We go over now to Ms. Gallant of the government, and then back to the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And through you to the Minister of Public Safety, first of all, in response to your comments, I would like to confirm that as MP for the riding which is home to CFB Petawawa, and that is the training ground of the warriors, and on behalf of the women and men who serve there in Canada's Armed Forces, they are distressed over the opposition intimating that they are somehow guilty of war crimes. Now, this committee did travel to Afghanistan, and one of the places we visited was the hospital, and it was truly extraordinary the way our medical military personnel would tend to our wounded, sometimes having to pronounce dead, and then with the same level of professionalism treat the insurgents and the Taliban. So truly incredible what they were able to do. And the soldiers and their families do not understand why members of their own country's parliament seem more concerned over the well-being of those who seek to destroy them than their own soldiers' safety and security. Now, in visiting the Defense Committee, visiting Afghanistan, we did see the training school for the Afghan National Police, and were briefed by Mr. Fudge on training of the Afghan National Police, and the fact that they had to begin at the stages of literacy and then human rights, even before they got into the police training. So my question is, if you could please report more details on the activities of the RCMP in Afghanistan, border security as it applies to your department's jurisdiction. And Minister, here at home, your department is responsible for safeguarding public infrastructure and emergency preparedness, and recognizing that security must first be established before infrastructure can be developed. what steps have been taken to safeguard the critical infrastructure from the standpoint of civilian protection in Afghanistan?
A number of questions there. I'll try and address them as succinctly as possible. On the question of infrastructure, it's important that Canadians know that our troops literally risk their lives daily, in many cases, to protect the people who are doing the development work. These are people who are there at Canada's offering to do anything from working at healthcare facilities, helping agricultural development, looking at education facilities, and they literally, in many cases, have to be escorted and protected when they go about their work. And in fact, when they've completed a project, that project has to be protected. All the projects that are done, as Minister Verner has indicated, are for the good of the Afghan people, and yet the Taliban and the other insurgents, it is their mission to kill the people who are doing the good work, including Afghan people and foreign development workers, and also to destroy the very projects that are meant to raise the standard of living in Afghanistan. So Canadians should know that our men and women in uniform literally are giving their lives to that ongoing development. It's an important factor. In terms of some detail, one of the days that I was in Afghanistan not too long ago, I observed our RCMP officers there training Afghan National Police. And I had wondered before I got there, how are the Afghan nationals going to receive training from, let's face it, people from another country? And I was impressed at the level of openness of these men. It was mainly men. It was all men in the particular division that I was looking at. Their level of openness to receive training. In this particular case, our RCMP officers were showing Afghan police how to stop a approaching vehicle, but respecting the lives of the people in it, so not stopping it with rockets, but stopping it, how to have the people exit the vehicle, how to check a vehicle that possibly has explosives embedded in it, to do it in a way that would not only be safe to the former inhabitants of the car, but also to themselves. This was a day-long exercise, and the Afghan National Police officers were intent on learning how to do this, seemed incredibly appreciative. At the end of the day, they were given, as they are at each stage of training, a certificate of training. And I can tell you with their new uniforms, as Minister of Foreign Affairs has indicated, were supplied, with the knowledge that they had, I mean, they stood proudly at attention. They received these certificates. They were feeling so good about what they had learned. And, you know, it's okay I just say this to opposition members, it's okay to talk about the good things that are happening in Afghanistan. You don't have to worry about that. It's quite proper to criticize the government, but it's okay to talk about the good things, too.
Thank you, Minister Day. We'll go to Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, first of all, I think the government members and ministers should stop making these offensive and demeaning remarks about where the opposition is coming from, where the Parliament of Canada is coming from in supporting our troops in Afghanistan. It demeans everybody, particularly it demeans the ones who are making these remarks. And I want to continue by saying that our troops are doing everything we're asking, NATO is asking, what this country is asking. But one thing that it doesn't appear we are doing, we're not getting, the Taliban continues to recruit, and particularly in Helmand and Kandahar province. We're told this is happening because we're not getting food to those populations that's supposed to be pacified. And we're not getting the schools built in those two provinces. We're not getting health care centers built in those two provinces. We're not getting food anywhere a couple of kilometers outside of Kandahar city. You know, why aren't we deploying more people through our development agencies, through our food agencies, and really making an impact and making our military success worthwhile? There's no point in having military success when we can't follow it up with civilian success on that side. And we're continually told that we are falling down on that. It's not just the Sentinelist group. There are other groups that are saying that we're having very minimal impact outside of Kandahar city and Kabul and the rest of Afghanistan. That's already, you know,
What are we doing in Helmand Province and Kandahar Province, where our soldiers are, in that regard?
I'm going to let the Minister of Defense answer with respect to the security side, and I think Madame Varnera can similarly provide statistics that, quite frankly, contradict your assertion that progress is not being made, food supplies and development is not taking place. I do appreciate what you've just said, though, that patriotism doesn't have to have a partisan stripe. And I think that's why I would reiterate the earlier comment that we should be very proud of what Canada is doing there, and we can all disagree on perhaps the methods in which it's happening. But this is a Canadian effort. It's not a political party effort. It's a Canadian effort.
Just quickly, and I'm going to hand over to Minister Verner, but I can tell you I've been there 4 times now, and that's not an accurate representation of what's going on in Kandahar Province. I can't speak for Helmand Province, but in Kandahar Province, our troops are spread out throughout the whole province, and support aid is spread throughout their whole province. There's thousands of families coming back who have returned to Panjwai and Zari and all these other districts, and life is returning there, and food is getting through. But so certainly from my perspective and getting reports back from the troops, that's not quite an accurate representation of what's going on there. But I'm going to hand over to Minister Verner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Indeed, Kandahar Province remains a challenge. You have to understand that there is a security situation that is very precarious there, and hence the importance of working in close collaboration with our troops on the ground there. But having said that, in Kandahar, I'm sorry, but there are examples of progress that have been made. According to the World Food Program data, there is 10,000 tons of food that has been delivered, and we envision that 20 million tons will be delivered next year. There are irrigation canals that have been built in Kandahar. I visited the Solakali village and met with the Community Development Council. I had the opportunity of meeting with farmers in the field who showed me these irrigation canals, and thanks to Canadian support and to our financial support, had been able to irrigate their fields and to produce crops. Roads have been built. There has been a great deal of vaccination that's been carried out. We've announced a new vaccination program that is massive, and it is targeting polio. And we are expecting to vaccinate 350,000 children in the Kandahar area. That program has almost been completed. And according to the discussions that I had with the representative of the World Health Organization when I went, it really has allowed us to almost eradicate the disease over there.
The end of the second round. We'll go to the third round. Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'd like to ask Minister Day a couple of questions. And first is, members of the Canadian military are over in Afghanistan fighting valiantly every day. But we know that they're not the only ones. There are civilian police members, the RCMP, and members of the Corrections Service Canada are in Afghanistan supporting the provincial reconstruction team effort to rebuild that war-torn part of the world. Can you tell the committee how many RCMP and Correctional Service Canada members are currently working in Afghanistan, what their mission is? And also earlier you mentioned in an earlier answer that the RCMP officers were assisting in the development of an Afghan police force, and what progress has been made so far towards increasing the effectiveness of that Afghani police force?
McKenzie, Mr. Day.
Again, briefly, first to reflect on the discussion around the table about the particular line of questioning. I think this has been a civil discussion today. There's been no abusive language, with one very notable exception. And all we are saying here is that when all questions for months upon months are about apparent or alleged mishandling of suspected terrorists, if that's the only line of questioning, and those questions are appropriate, and we never hear about anything else. That's why, as Mrs. Gallant has said, troops start to get a certain message. That's all we're saying, if that's all that ever is asked or implied. In terms of the RCMP, there are presently 8 RCMP officers. Now, there are moments where that might change, where a visiting officer or 2 might be over there for a specific purpose of transfer of information or training. They are there principally, but not entirely, principally to train and mentor the growing capacity of the Afghan police themselves. It is growing. This is brand new to the Afghan people and the Afghan police. This is the first time really they're really seeing human rights being applied in police work, and they're responding to it very favorably. And that's so that is the mandate, principally the mandate, but not exclusively the RCMP. In terms of our 2 corrections officers, and there are only 2 over there at the time, they're doing a formidable job in terms of visiting these facilities. Their mandate is to encourage capacity building within the prison system. Now, they do report, as we've already said, if there are allegations of abuse or torture, but principally their mandate is to mentor, to guide, to lead to the capacity building within the prison facilities themselves. They're also making reports on what they feel would be positive additions in terms of infrastructure or even in terms of some of the basic elements of life. These are third world prisons, make no mistake about that. But they are, in all of these questions, it's which direction are things going? And the direction they're going is the direction of improvement. But there is a long way to go in this. But they have made a very good start. Our officials have made a very good start, not just working with officials, but with the Afghan officials in the police forces and in the prisons. But their level of acceptance, the level of acceptance of the Afghan officers for Canadian officers is very high and something we can be proud of.
Okay, you have a minute 20.
The last part of that question was about them assisting in the development. And have you seen what that progress is and how we're making that progress with the Afghani police? Some steps, positive steps that they're able to make with the help of Canadians?
I have seen it with the police in action in their training. When I was over there, as I think I indicated earlier, I was not able to get outside the wire to the prison itself because there were some attack warnings that had been received through intelligence that particular day, and so I wasn't able to get there. So I'm responding to reports from our officers and from others who have, in fact, been there. The concern about the questioning, if I could just close with this comment, all the questions today from the opposition are appropriate in terms of what they're asking. However, it is worthy to note that there has not been one question, either today or in any time that I've ever heard, about what are we doing to make sure that the so-called detainees, the suspected terrorists, are not escaping to kill more Canadian soldiers, to kill civilians. This is heard very rarely. A lot of concern about their treatment, and we say that's appropriate, but very rarely do we hear questions about what the Taliban have been doing, not just to Canadian soldiers, but to Afghan citizens themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Day. We're moving over to the government. Mr. Eiking, I believe, for question. Oh, jeez, I did it again. Over to the former government, now the official opposition, Mr. Eiking.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see you here, Rick, helping us organize this chaos. The CETA minister continues to paint the rosy picture of her rollout of aid in Africa and Afghanistan. There's a report today, Mr. Chair. Can you quiet up the government there?
Continue, Mr. Arkin.
There's a report today in the National Post, and it's a quote on the failure of the anti-drug program, the anti-poppy program in Afghanistan. And there's some quotes here from some international sources saying, there's something inherently wrong with the entire program, from the complicated application process to the confusion over what projects are eligible to the sheer impossibility of working out and who's actually doing the approving and rejecting. It states, the Afghan bureaucracy is cumbersome and can only roll out so much of the program. There's been $3 million allocated to this program, and it's ineffectual, and it's not being rolled out properly. And it's often criticized here today, the Seneless report. The Sendler's report has some good ideas about dealing with the poppy eradication, and it's only fair to our troops that we deal with the whole situation with the poppies in a proper way. The Americans are not doing it in a proper way. We should not be following their suit. So I'd like to ask the Minister of CEDA, what is she going to do about increasing and getting some efficiency rollout of the program and showing some results? Because, as Mr. Maguire mentioned, those two provinces, southern provinces, the poppy cultivation is up as of last year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as the first member's question is concerned, concerning the special fund against narcotics, Canada sent $1 million, or put $1 million into the fund with a grant that was given to the UN development program. Our contribution is reserved for a component of the fund that supports economic activities and sustainable development. So Canada, which is now sitting on the steering committee for these projects, and which committee which is meeting next month, will closely study the issue of what projects are being put forward at that time. As far as the rest of the question was concerned, concerning the Sandless report, I would simply like to add to what I already said earlier on. We always take into account the different proposals that are made to us in order to improve our assistance to Afghanistan. That's why we're there, Mr. Chairman. Nevertheless, in the long list of projects put forward by Sendless, and after a meeting that took place last week between the Sendless Council and officials from my department, there was a whole series of questions that were put. Why? Because we want to continue to make progress in Kandahar, as well as in other areas. So I have to say to you that we're still awaiting answers, because they were unable to give us the responses during that last meeting.
But the proof is going to be in the reduction of acres, and that's where the proof is going to be. And you can do all the studying you want, but unless you see a reduction in acres, we are failing over there. I guess my next question is back to the monitoring of the prisoners. We have an agreement in place. Is the monitoring started? Who is monitoring? From which one of our departments is monitoring the prisoners? And what resources is the government putting into it?
Well, yes, to answer the question directly, of course, the monitoring has begun. There have been 5 visits. That's based on information. I'm not sure you were here earlier. The Afghan ambassador informs us that 5 visits have been complete. Of those visits, they, of course, stressed the need of the Afghan authorities themselves to comply with the enhanced agreement, that these unrestricted and private visits were to take place, and at the same time the further capacity building within the prison detention system itself was to continue. That, of course, is being assisted by Corrections Canada. In addition to that, what this enhanced agreement does, as you know, is it guarantees that there will be a clarification as far as the lines of communication go as to responsibility, and that the commitments by the Afghan government itself in regard to international standards of human rights, their own domestic law, and any reported abuse that involves detainees that were turned over by Canadian forces is to be followed up, and we are expecting fully that a report will be returned to us. Having said that, the ambassador informs us that thus far it's his belief that the head of security, who is acting, of course, as the senior advisor to the President himself, advises him that this will be adhered to. This was the same information that was relayed to the Prime Minister directly by President Karzai on his recent visit, and this process is well in place and is creating a great deal of confidence with respect to future situations around detainees.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Mr. Del Maestro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd submit that
cannot wave the flag of support for the forces, but only ever offer criticism for the efforts that our Canadian forces and our officials are making in Afghanistan. You cannot stand for human rights and equality while campaigning to abandon our efforts to ensure a permanent end to the abuse and oppression of the people of Afghanistan. This meeting was called regarding alleged potential detainee abuse in Afghanistan, but I think there's a broader issue of abuse that we know that was documented under the Taliban. And my question to Secretary of State Georges is, it's clear that that many in the opposition are either unaware or don't want the message of the significant gains that we are making in bringing human rights and equality to Afghanistan. Can you talk a little bit about what you witnessed on the ground in the first-hand testimony that you heard when you were in Afghanistan?
Ms. Georges?
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Very quickly.
Something, you're absolutely right. I think it's really important to point out that there's been too many members from the opposition here either rolling their eyes or complaining that we're making an attempt here to show Canadians and express to Canadians the incredible progress that is being made in Afghanistan. There has to be balance. They want to know about the progress. They want to know what our Canadian brave men and women are accomplishing.
Thank you for your comments. The bells have started, and according to our standing orders, we then must adjourn. I want to thank all members for their questions today, and especially to the ministers. I want to thank them for the very good answers and for the clarifications of some of the concerns that was brought forward in that motion. We are adjourned.